Hello friends, I have had a few people ask me to start working chaturangas, push-ups, right, from plank to chaturangas in class, in both the gentle class and in the regular class. They're wanting to get more arm strength. I'd like to remind you it's not just your arms, that it's your core, but we'll get into that in a little bit. And I want you first to look at my body, and I want you to see the two patterns that almost everybody that I work with goes into. Some of us know how to hold it so that doesn't go into that pattern, but it still would if we weren't preventing it from happening. Does that make sense? So by the way, you're going to need 2 blocks, but not quite yet, in a little bit. Hit pause and get them and come back if you need them, right? So I'm going to bring myself into a half plank. And again, I want you to look at my body first. You're not doing anything yet, because I think it's going to be helpful for you to see it in my body and then feel which one your body tends towards. And it could tend towards one or the other, depending on your position, where you are with gravity, the day. But usually we have one we go into. So I see the snake a lot, right? I see that as people start to lower down, their hips lower down, and they lose all of that contraction on the front of the abdomen, and they come down a little bit like a snake. And it's not wrong, right? It's not bad. You're not a bad yogi. But if you continue to do that over and over and over and over again, every time I lower myself, and I'm not going to do it all the way because I don't want to compress my low back. This is the pattern I used to do, by the way. As that comes in, you can see the compression happening in my low back, and that can end up in time, right? It's called a repetitive stress injury. You can do this, push-up. You can do your push-ups 5 times, 100 times, and then all of a sudden, a little bit down the line, you start to have issues because it's a repetitive thing that you're doing over and over, compressing the low back, compressing the low back, compressing the low back, and it can start to give you issues. And it might not be that you feel it in the low back. That's where all the nerves, right? We innervate the legs, the hips, and everything through that area. So you can feel it in other areas of your body. It's not just where the compression happens. The other pattern that I see all the time, right, is where the arms start to go into internal rotation. So as the elbows bend, right, suddenly people are looking back and down, and their shoulders are rolling forward. Their upper back is rounding. The shoulder blades are moving around the side of the body, and they bring themselves down that way, right? Again, might not hurt you right off the bat, but if you continue to do it over and over and over, bearing a lot of weight with your shoulders and internal rotation, it can cause impingement, it can cause rotator cuff tears. I'm not saying it's going to, it might not. Maybe you do that successfully your whole yoga practicing life. But for many people, and I've worked with a decent amount at this, thousands of bodies at this point in time, and have a lot of friends, right? It probably will cause issues down the road, if not when you're learning it, yeah? So we're going to use our blocks to play with those lines just a little bit. So have 2 blocks. You're going to adjust it. Actually, put the blocks off to the side. First, I want you to figure out what pattern you are. Sorry, I forgot that piece. And you can just do probably a half push-up. You don't have to get all sassy and do a full push-up. It will present itself in either one, right? So I have my shoulders over my wrists. I have my knees down behind my hips. I'm moving my hips and my ribs into the midline, long spine, Goldilocks position with the shoulder blades, right? They're not in the extreme of any of the 4 positions of the shoulder blade. They're right in the middle. Now bend your elbows just a little bit. You don't have to go down very far, and find out what's happening. Are your shoulders wanting to get pulled down towards your elbows, and are you rounding and looking back? Or are you looking forward and you're collapsing the whole mid-body down towards the ground before you even start to get the upper body to move? Just notice which one it is and then come out of that, right? So hopefully you have just discovered which pattern is yours, because you'll work differently depending on the pattern, right? There is a midline we call an anatomy that splits the body from right to left sides. And we're going to work, those of us who, right, we just, and the low back gets compressed. We're going to take our frontal hips and our frontal ribs, and we're going to knit them into the midline to try to contain this part of the body so everything lowers at once. Those of us who are shoulder rounders, internal rotators, right, you're going to work at really trying to keep those scapula, those shoulder blades in that neutral position and keeping the collarbone broad, right? we're going to be able to do that a little bit better with blocks underneath us, so we're not bearing the full weight of the body. So the blocks are on the medium height. I have the long distance going the same way as the short edge of my mat. And then when I come down on those blocks, I'm going to have one that's at my hips, right at the frontal hip bones. My frontal hip bones don't really touch it, right, because they're wide enough, but I have enough support and it's not crushing my abdomen. Now, depending on whether or not you have breasts or not, if you have breasts, I find it most comfortable to bring this right underneath my breasts, and I even will move my breasts so they come up over that block so I don't have that discomfort of crushing. But if you're breastless, right, or at least there's not a lot of flesh there, you could move the block a little higher if that suits you. But I feel fully supported on this block right now, yeah? All of my weight is down on it. Now I'm going to bring my hands back until my wrists are underneath my elbows. And then I'm going to curl my toes under, I'm going to push my heels back mightily. Reach the crown of the head forward, reach the chest a little forward, right? And move the shoulder blades into their Goldilocks position. So this is Chaturanga. Chaturanga, or approximately for most of us, right, is when our elbows and our shoulders are the same height. So Chaturanga Dandasana. Push the heels back, reach the crown of the head forward. Now my rib friends, right, my rib and belly friends, take your frontal hip points and your frontal ribs, and I want you to knit them into the midline, and I want you to feel how those fire up. Everybody should do that, by the way, but some of us need it a little more. So hopefully we're in neither position right now. We're not collapsing our abdomen, nor are we internally rotating our shoulders in this position. It's hard to hold, even with our weight coming down onto the blocks, right? Take a breath. And bring the knees down, push the floor away, and come on up through your half push-up. We got one more, and then we're going to practice doing an actual chaturanga without the blocks, right? And I would say, you know, I would practice with the blocks more than without in the beginning. And just every once in a while, do a chaturanga without the props just to see, oh, this is where I'm at and this is what's learning. But you're going to learn the motions, and the muscles are going to strengthen with the help of the blocks more than they will without, right? So this one is similar in the fact that it's going to help me bear some of the weight. I'm going to have my hands directly in behind, but now I've got long ways, going the long way of my mat. I'm still on the medium height, right? I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to bend my elbows. I come into like a half plank, and I'm going to bend my elbows until my shoulders come down, right, onto that block. And my shoulder rounder forwarders, this one is really good for your line. I can keep my knees down, right, or I can curl my toes under, and I can push my heels back. Now notice that the shoulders really want to push down in the block. I want you to widen the shoulders out, shoulder blades in their Goldilocks position, knit the frontal ribs and the frontal hips. So this one's a little harder to hold. We have to bear a little bit more of the weight. Push your hands down, your finger pads down, elbows in, elbows move back towards the heels. Take another breath. Bring your knees down. This one's harder to push up from, so I usually let my body round down and just move the blocks out of the side. Let's take a crocodile for just a moment. And just let the body rest after all that. Whew. Bring your hands next to your low floating ribs, tone your abdomen, leave the knees down and come up through a half push-up, and then move yourself up into downward facing dog. So we are going to try to come down through our push-up, but let's start here for a second, right? Shoulder blades down the back. Knees can totally be bent. It's got nothing to do with the legs right now. It's all about the spine and the shoulders, the rib cage. Some of us already here, right? We still need to knit our ribs and our hips. I'm in your school, by the way. That is such a, oh my God, it's a thing for me. 22 years in, and it's every single day. Come forward into plank, and already, right, those of us who need to knit our ribs, we really need to start knitting them here. Now, before you even start to come down, shoulder blades down the back. If you want to bring the knees down, I'm going to. It brings my awareness more into my upper body. I'm not dealing as much with weight, right? It doesn't make you less of a yogi. And then from there, bend your elbows just a little bit. Knit your front ribs. Imagine those blocks underneath your shoulders, helping hold the weight. Look a little forward, shoulder blades in their Goldilocks. And then see if you can bend the elbows even a little bit more, and pause, and then come all the way down to the ground. Crocodile, other hand on top, take a breath. Hands next to low floating ribs, tone the belly, leave the knees down. Don't give yourself the extra work right now. You're working down, 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 right? So some of my friends, that gives you plenty to work with while you're trying to strengthen this line, right? And again, you might not even do anything without the blocks for a while. You might simply stay with the one under the ribs and on the frontal hip points, and just work that one and just work the line and start to find the muscles necessary. Some of my friends, we're going to come on down and we'll move through that little part of the push-up series. People call it vinyasa. Vinyasa actually technically just means breath, right? To move on the breath. And so most of what we do in yoga is vinyasa, but I call this the push-up series, and this is what most people correlate to vinyasa. I think the word has been kind of taken over, which I don't love. Inhale, reach the chest forward, find the top of the push-up. Bring your knees down if you want to, right? Or leave them lifted. Come forward on the tippy toes if you leave them lifted. And when you start to bend the elbows in and back, right? Hopefully your wrists underneath your elbows, shoulders same height, and then push back up and push back to downward facing dog. One more time and we'll flow through. Inhale forward. I didn't warn you I was going to add that in. I didn't know I was until I did it. Come forward on your tippy toes. Bend the elbows. Hover. Some of us may be low cobra if your body's ready for it. We haven't done a practice. Don't hurt yourself. Inhale into upward dog and exhale back into downward facing dog. Go ahead and bring the knees down wide. Bring the big toes together to touch, forehead down. Take a child's pose for just a moment and let the body relax. Now, when you're in child's pose, if your low back is like, oh, a little bit of relief, chances are great that you collapse and compress in on the low back when you move through your push-up series. Again, it may or may not, but chances are pretty good that if you do that quite a bit, repetitive stress injury will come into play at some point in time. If the front of your shoulders are just like worked like crazy, right? I mean, I still feel the front of my shoulders by all means, but that might mean that you're trying to relearn that line, right? And not let the shoulders go into internal rotation. Push the ground away and come on up. So hopefully that gives you just a little bit of information about your body specifically and some things that you can do to work on it. I'll continue to put some other ones up. You know, my gentle friends, I wouldn't go doing the push-up, but doing the baby bit to find out what your tendency is and then putting the blocks in, right? This one, putting the blocks in, that might be a really good way for you to start to learn the line. Maybe not. I'll put another gentle one on with our hips, chest, chin business. Hands together in front of the heart, inhale. Exhale, bow the head in. Just taking a moment of gratitude, this space and this time. Love you, beautiful body. Namaste. And don't come with the attitude of I came, I saw, I conquered, or that you're not good enough, strong enough, all of these things. Let go of that. Please, please start to learn to just accept your beautiful body as it is. That's the work of yoga. It's not to do a fancy push-up.